Okay, well, I have 3 o'clock, so hopefully some people will keep trickling on and joining us. But uh, I just want to start by asking you all, have you ever been driving down a county highway and you see kind of black smoke on the horizon, or maybe you drive past a field down a gravel road and that field's just pitch black and it doesn't look like anything else is ever going to grow there again. And sometimes you see that stuff and you can't help but wonder, oh man, what kind of disaster happened here? But chances are you're actually witnessing the results of a prescribed burn. And we're here today to learn more about the why, the when, and the how of this often critical yet overlooked management tool that is prescribed fire. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jorgen Rose. I'm the Habitat Coordinator with Practical Farmers of Iowa, and I'm joined here behind the scenes with Maddie Mueller. And I want to introduce our host today. We're broadcasting live from the Office of Landowner and Conservationist Eric Hoien up at Big Spirit Lake, and from the Office of STRIPS Farmer Liaison Tim Younquist in Ames at Iowa State University. And we're going to hear from them both here shortly to learn a little bit more about prairie strips and a little bit more about prescribed fire as a management tool from Habitat. But first, I just need to do a few acknowledgements. So this event is a joint effort between Practical Farmers of Iowa and our partner, the Iowa State University's Science-Based Trials of Row Crops integrated with Prairie Strips, or just STRIPS project. And the STRIPS project is composed of a team of scientists, educators, extension specialists who have chosen to work together on the use of prairie strips as a farmland conservation practice. And this team strives to more fully understand the assembly, management, function, and value of prairie strips, to communicate research results to diverse audiences, and to assist others with the implementation of prairie strips in farm fields. This field day is also supported by a variety of sponsors and funders, the McKnight Foundation, the Ceres Trust Foundation, and this work is also associated with the Natural Resources Conservation Service Conservation Innovation Grant. I also want to make sure I thank all of our level A sponsors. These are our major sponsors who have supported our entire field day season. It is safe to say that without them, we could not make all our field days possible. So I really want to thank them. And then I also want to make sure I give a shout out to all our level B sponsors. And again, we really appreciate their continued support of our field day season. So just a little bit about Practical Farmers of Iowa before we get started. PFI is a farmer member-based organization, and all that means is that we go where our farmers tell us to go. And we achieve our mission of equipping farmers to build resilient farms and communities in a variety of ways, but our primary activity is helping farmers and landowners connect and share knowledge in whatever way best suits them. And today we're doing this through a virtual field day. So you can learn more about all of our efforts, all of the services that we provide our members, and you can learn more about becoming a PFI member on our website, practicalfarmers.org. So here's just a little bit about how this virtual field day is going to go. So here in a couple minutes, Eric and Tim are going to cycle through some photos and video of Eric's farm and really talk about some of the prescribed burns that Eric had completed earlier this spring. We'll plan on leaving a few minutes at the end for some further Q&A, and we'll plan on wrapping up around 3:30, but we'll also make sure to include Tim's contact information so that you can reach out if you have specific questions about prairie strips or prescribed fire, and you can get those answered after the field day. You can also tune in for more information for Eric's second virtual field day coming up here next month, July 31st at 3 p.m. And you can find more information about that on practicalfarmers.org as well. So in terms of Q&A, we're going to take clarifying questions throughout the event. So feel free to type those into the chat box. You can find the chat box at the bottom of your screen. Make sure that when you do type into the chat box, that to field is set to everyone, or all attendees and panelists, not just panelists only. You want everyone to see your questions so we can make sure everyone's on the same page. And then when we're done, we'll also have some time for Q&A. So if there are clarifying questions, type those in the chat box. We'll answer those throughout. Also, feel free to type bigger overarching questions in the chat box, and we'll hold on to those and make sure those get answered at the end of the field day. And then when we're done with everything, please tell us what you thought about this virtual field day, and we really value your input. We really want you to fill out a survey, so when you log out of Zoom today, you'll be prompted to complete an evaluation for the event, and everyone who fills out the survey will be entered to win a PFI branded water bottles. So don't miss out on the opportunity for free merch, and please give us your feedback. And so with that, I am going to thank Eric and Tim for their time and expertise here today, and I'm going to turn things over to Eric.
Thanks, Jürgen. As Jürgen mentioned, my name is Eric Hoien. My wife Kelly and I bought this farm back in 2007, and I read about the STRIPS program in the Des Moines Register a bunch of years ago and caught my interest and found out more and decided that it probably made sense. So we want to just go ahead and get started with the next slide. This is the next slide. This is our farm looking to the northeast. This is, as I mentioned, it's just on the northeast corner of Big Spirit Lake, the largest natural lake in the state of Iowa. You can kind of see where the strips are outlined because we'd already done the first burn. So wherever you see the black along the edges, that's where the prairie grass strips actually go. Just to the south a little bit is a meandering stream that runs directly into Big Spirit Lake. This is locally known as Reed's Run. And according to the DNR, about 17% of all runoff into Big Spirit Lake comes through Reed's Run. So you can see we're not gonna change the world by doing this, but I think it'll probably actually help things out as we're pretty darn close, and that strip on the south side would typically have the runoff just go directly there. So if we want to go to the next slide, we can look at the farm looking in a northerly direction. It's concurrent and runs alongside one of our local recreational trails, and then the road around the lake, and then the homes along the lake. So it's a pretty visible location. So it's a great spot for people to try to see and understand what strips are about. There's two different water testing flumes on our site that are monitored by Iowa Lakeside Lab here at West Okoboji. The first one that Jürgen is highlighting, that one is after the water runs off through the strips. So that gives them a way to see what the water quality is like after it's gone through the strips. And then we have a leading edge one up to the top of the strips, at the top of the rectangle there, that comes directly off the field. So that way they've got a chance to monitor the water that comes directly off the field runoff, and then the water that comes through the strips, and do a comparison. Both of those have solar cells, so they can just wirelessly transmit the information directly to Lakeside Lab. And then also along with that, point out the fact that Chris Whitty from Iowa State comes up in the summertime 2 or 3 different times. There's a handful of shallow 15-foot wells on site that they test and check the water for. So Iowa State's doing their water testing as well. Go ahead and go to the next one if you would, please. Tim will kind of talk to you about why that shape of that strips is the way it is.
Hey everybody. So you might be looking at those burned areas that that Jürgen and Eric were showing us on the overhead map or in the aerial photos, and you kind of might be wondering, well, gee, why are there these larger areas along the edge of the field? I know I sure would be wondering. And essentially, water doesn't flow evenly over the surface of the ground. You have some areas that are what are called areas of concentrated flow. So essentially, the large areas along the border of the lake, there's a couple that are these big bump outs, are essentially draining a larger area of that field. So we found with the prairie strips, you can add a small amount of prairie to an ag field, and you can see disproportionate benefits. But if you really want to help retain soil and keep nutrients kind of filtered before they get out of the edge of the field, knowing how the water flows over your field is pretty critical, and finding those areas where the water flows and being able to basically vary the width of the buffer in those areas to make the buffer a little bit bigger, you're going to see better gains. And then, you know, just being strategic with the placement, you don't have to have a huge buffer along the whole distance of the border of the field. just finding those areas where you can really maximize the filtration, where you're going to have more water flowing through. So that's kind of what we're looking at there. You want to go to the next slide? Yeah, and then you can kind of see here, I know it's just a bunch of numbers with acreages listed to them, but what we're looking at here with Eric's field is the CRP, or Conservation Reserve Program practice codes. So Eric is receiving federal assistance through the U.S. Department of Agriculture for doing conservation work like prairie strips on his property. We've got a couple different codes. There's a CP42, so that'd be known as a pollinator habitat. And then there's a CP27 and 28, which are a farmable wetland program. So Eric did this, this was back in 2015. And this was prior to prairie strips having its own practice code in the through CRP or through the Farm Service Agency. So it's actually quite a lot easier to go to your local USDA service center. There's one in each county. You know, for those of you that are farmers and landowners out there, I'm sure you're already familiar with your service center and the folks that work there. But you could go and request a CP43 or prairie strips if you're interested. And just as another note, you know, looking at what we see here on Eric's field, prairie strips doesn't necessarily mean strips that are going to be going up through the field. You can still achieve a lot of really good benefits for wildlife, for soil retention, and for nutrient filtering just by having fields along the edge of or having strips along the edge of the field. Yeah, you can go to the next slide.
So here we are looking along the south edge of the field. You can see the different burn line. We did the first burn on April 19th, and then weather conditions prompted them to stop. And then the second burn they're finishing up on April 25th, so barely a week later. So that's the part that you'll see burning in these next several slides and videos. It's also worth noting, if you go to the top of the center of the screen, there's another field just south of there that was originally purchased by the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation and then turned over to our local conservation board. That was burnt about a week and a half prior to this one. So we're having a lot of water and soil protection in the Big Spirit Lake. Next one.
So obviously those of you that are here listening, you're interested in fire, and one of the big points that we want to drive home about today's field day is fire is a pretty essential component. I mean, the American tallgrass prairie was meant to be burned. It contains species that have adapted over time to tolerate fire really well. You can see from the slide on screen, many of the prairie species have roots that go very, very deep. So as that fire burns off the top, they'll have enough root reserve to come back the following year. These species are adapted to this fire. You know, fire was used by Native Americans pretty extensively, and there were also a lot of natural fires that would have taken place through things like lightning strikes. So again, these species have adapted to tolerate fire in a way that really a lot of the woody species, so things like cottonwoods or willows, mulberries, they're not adapted to fire. They'll really not be able to stand up to it. And a lot of our invasive weeds that we're fighting, both in the fields and in pastures or in prairies, things like that, they're not adapted to fire. Burning can help take that thatch layer off the top. You'll see a stronger regrowth the following year. It really cleans it up, and you can increase seed production also with fire that will help the prairie get even stronger over time. So fire is an essential component of prairie. It's a really, really valuable management tool. You've got to know a few things about how to take care of the fire and how to manage it, and we'll try to go over some of those details, but this is something that the prairie responds really, really well to fire.
So one of the ways that this particular fire crew works that I think is probably the best system I've seen, they pull in with their pickup truck, four-wheel drive pickup truck, flatbed with a big water tank. and a gasoline powered water pump. What they'll do is they'll drive around the perimeter of what's going to be burnt and wet that down really well. That way, when the fire burns up to that spot, it'll just pretty much take care of going out on its own. I've seen other times where they've come in and tilled up around the part to be burned or mowed around it. But I think this is the least labor intensive, and you got to have water there anyway in case you get a flare up that you can't control. This is probably the best system I've seen. And if we go to the next one, you'll see this, of these 23 acres, it was just a two-person crew. These two guys took care of the whole thing. The guy in the orange cap owns the company. He used to do burns for the Clay County Pheasants Forever chapter. And I think he realized that with the growth of prairies and with the STRIPS program, he probably could go out on his own and do it as a part-time to full-time occupation. I think it's worth noting that if you go to your USDA or NRCS office, they will have a list of accredited fire people to take care of burns. And why is that important? Well, there's a lot to it. The humidity's got to be right. The wind direction has to be right. It has to be a minimal amount of wind. Temperature, there's a lot of factors that go into play. You don't want to just go out and start it and say, today looks like a great day. So knowing that those are a lot more accessible in today's world than they used to be is really helpful. And again, your USDA and NRCS offices should have good lists of people to contact. Next one, please. So this is just looking from the west going east. I'm going to do a flyover, I think. And you'll notice off to the right-hand side, along the fence line, you'll see a pickup truck, which is pulling the water wagon that they're in the process of driving the perimeter. You can see the definite difference between the burn the week before and what's left to burn here. So they've already got a natural break before they start. And as we fly over on this one, you can see the backfire, the fire line to the right. They always light the downwind side first, which gives a more complete and slow burn. And then they'll light what they call the head fire on the upwind side. You can see the flames are a lot higher. They're being fanned by the wind. That'll burn up to the backfire and pretty much just self-extinguish. And a little bit more of the same. And as we go a little further on, you'll see one of the two fire crew walking with the drip torch, lighting the, I guess it's this one, lighting the, helping light the head fire. And so, Tim, if you want to mention a little bit about the equipment involved.
So as Eric mentioned, it does take quite a bit of know-how and experience to get going and know what you're doing with Prairie, or with the Prairie Fire, but there are just a few basic tools. You can see in this gentleman's left hand, he has a little flapper for kind of extinguishing the fire if anything starts to creep into the soybean field there. And then in his right hand is one of the most important tools. It's what's called a drip torch. That has a mixture of diesel fuel and gasoline and a little bit of a wick on the end, and you can essentially drag the fire along with you. And using the wind direction and using the fire breaks and the things that are in place, you can create a linear line of fire that's going to move in a monolithic way that's going to burn just kind of exactly where you want it to. The drip torch and just having something to extinguish the fire, those are kind of two of the most important tools, but that drip torch is really going to be what you want versus just kind of going out with a book of matches and trying to start the fire here and there along the line. The drip torch is really going to give you that control and be able to harness the wind as much as you can. We'll kind of get into a little more of the basics later on, but that drip torch would be one. If you're considering maybe doing a small burn or trying to learn more, that'd be something that you could easily find either in a forestry supply catalog or somewhere on the internet. Switch up to the next one. Yeah, there you can see again, he's just continuing to drag that fire, and basically the fire will kind of dribble out of that end, and just, you can see from the direction of the smoke moving away into the prairie. This is what would be called a head fire. This is the thing that you want to be kind of the most careful or the most prepared for. You know, if you think about the classic prairie fires that could outrun a person on a horse, you know, this is the kind of fire we're talking about. These flame lengths can be incredibly high, really loud, really hot, and no amount of like a little flapper in your hand is going to stop them. You know, you really have to have what are called fire breaks in place, you know, either a mowed burn break or something like a road or a crop field that's been disked, or as Eric mentioned, a wet line where water's been placed. But that head fire is really, it's helpful to get the burn done quickly. But if you're going to do a head fire, you have to have a plan in place and you have to know what you're doing. Go to the next slide, please.
So you can see as it just kind of starts to, as it continues on down the way, that fire gains momentum, strength, the wind fans it a little bit more, and it burns up to that backfire line, and for all practical purposes, once it gets to that point, it just pretty much self-extinguishes because it runs out of fuel. Pretty much the only other tool that they might have is, you can see he's got a garden hand in his rake. So between the drip torch, the garden rake, the flapper, and the water, that's all they had. You can see it kind of starts to build up momentum, a little bit more steam. You can see in the background the black from the backfire, so it'll burn this off and then just kind of dwindle down. There you can really see it. We were lucky that day. There was a squall line that came through and kicked up the winds to about 10 to 15 miles an hour. And it was just as things were getting close to finishing up. So that wind was kind of helping really push that along. But again, you can see the water wagon, the importance of being ready for those changes, because I've been a part and witnessed other prairie burns that wind can switch direction. It can come up all of a sudden, and sometimes when you think it's dead calm, it'll still switch. So you gotta be ready to go at a moment's notice, and you want to make sure you got the keys to the ignition. And just kind of finishing up there, they got the Swampert down in the left-hand picture, finishing up, getting the embers out, smokes for a while. You can see in the right-hand photo how it's kind of, as Tim mentioned earlier, kind of creeping into the bean stubble a little bit. I think, you know, if you have corn stubble left over, it's a little bit more of a risk to catch fire. So again, you still have to be prudent. And I took a series of photographs after the burn. The top left-hand one, let's see, that's dated April 28th. The first burn on the left was on April 19th. The other side, April 25th. You can see there's already, after barely a week, the green growth starting to come back, and you can see the definitive line. The other two photos are along the trail portion. You can kind of see already that it's greening up pretty decent. I don't think there was any rain that week. So as Tim mentioned earlier, all those root systems are down below ground. You're not hurting the plants. You're actually helping the plants out by opening up the sunlight so they can thrive that much better. Next slide, please. And so again, a week later, left slide, again, you can still see a little bit of a burn line between the two, but not much. it's a little harder to tell. And the picture on the right, you're really having a hard time seeing that it was even burnt at all. And again, another week later, in the top left picture, you really can't even, I can barely see where the burn line was. Really starting to green up and getting thicker all the time. And then I think this next one is the most recent one we took. So June 16th, approximately 2 months after the burn, the picture on the right, that grass is probably shinned knee high already. And on the left, you absolutely can't see. If I didn't have my tire tracks to follow, I wouldn't know where to go for that picture. When we do the second video webinar in July, you'll really see a difference. You'll see a picture of probably about chest high with a lot of flowers and forbs by then. So if we go to the next one, one of the questions I've been asked, and again, I've been a part of different burns in the past, been around them. Passersby will always come and be concerned about the wildlife. You know, what about all that habitat you're ruining? You know, wildlife is always living in danger. They know how to pay attention. You can see these geese are obviously not at all concerned by that fire in the background. The same thing with small ground animals and varmints and pheasants. They know how to get out of the way. And again, thinking back to nesting habitat, there's nesting habitat again within a month after the burn, if not sooner. So you're actually helping out the wildlife, not hurting them. And if we go to the next one, you'll see that even my dog Eddie, he doesn't give a darn about that fire. He just focused on those geese. And the fire's still burning in the background. So, yeah. Jürgen, go ahead.
Great. So we have a few minutes here for questions. Thank you again, Eric and Tim. If anyone has questions, feel free to chat them into the chat box and we will relay those to Eric and Tim. But I want to start out by asking each of you, if you had one piece of advice for a farmer or a landowner who has some prairie strips and is interested in using fire, what would your one top piece of advice be for that individual? Eric, you want to go first?
I'd just say hire it done, make sure that somebody else is doing it for you. I think all red-blooded Americans, especially males, like to watch fire, so the process is still pretty fun, but it can be scary. And if you don't have somebody that's really knowing what they're doing, you can get in a lot of trouble. So number one, hire a professional.
And Tim?
A few things, I guess, starting out, in no way come away from this 30-minute webinar thinking that you are in somehow ready to burn. Go out and get yourself some experience. There's a lot of CRP that's out there nowadays. There's a lot of the CP42 or pollinator habitat that was put in over the last 5 to 8 years. And a lot of that is coming up for a mid-contract maintenance. So if you're interested in burning, you know, find a field day with your local county conservation board, find a friend, a neighbor, somebody that's going to be burning, go there and just participate in that, watch them, take notes, and just get yourself some experience before you go out and try it, because it can be a really fun tool. It can be it's the closest thing to a magic wand that there is for anybody that's gone out and pulled sweet clover or scooped out wild parsnip or any of this other stuff. There are things about prairie that can be pretty difficult, but fire it's a very entertaining part. But there are a few key rules that you have to follow, and getting yourself some experience is going to be kind of the best thing. And then once you get that experience, have a plan in place. You know, get a burn plan written down, have your burn breaks in place, and then really just be watching the weather for a few week period, you know, either in the spring or the fall, whenever you plan to burn. There's kind of benefits for doing both. But yeah, just get yourself some experience and then have a plan in place. Those would be my two biggest things.
Great. We have a couple questions. This is maybe for Eric in your specific situation, and then maybe Tim can speak a little more generally. But who all did you need to notify before you conducted your prescribed burn?
Typically, it's a good idea to contact the local fire department so they know what's going on, so they don't get a lot of phone calls from people saying, "Hey, there's a fire out there. Better go check it out." So that's pretty important. So that the emergency services let them know, because whenever people see smoke, they get a little excited. And then also too, if it's in an area where you're going to be affecting neighbors with smoke, it's a good idea to go around and talk to them and say, you know, we have plans to do a burn. Hopefully it's not going to affect you, but you might want to keep your windows closed just in case the wind direction changes. So I think neighbors, emergency services, that's what I'd recommend.
Tim, anyone to add? Anything to add?
Yeah, that's it. Just call your local sheriff's department. They really appreciate to know, you know, kind of when you're going to be started and where the location of that fire is going to be. And then they also really appreciate a call when that's out, just so then they don't have to deploy resources if you have it under control, or if, say, things would get out of control, they could rapidly respond. And then, you know, just letting your neighbors know as a courtesy, especially, you know, you get a nice day in October or November, you know, maybe people have their windows open, or even in, you know, April, May, you could kind of disturb some neighbors, or if you have somebody, you know, let's say got a respiratory problem or something like that, you don't want to put a bunch of smoke over their house without them knowing. So calling emergency services and then just letting the neighbors know that are going to be in the affected area. Those are two things that I'd highly recommend.
Great. Eric, here's another question. How many times have you burned since the establishment in 2015?
This was the first time, according to our CRP contract, whatever year it is, it's either year 4 or year 5, called for a prescribed burn. And I think we'll have another one in year 9 or 10. So just, this is the first time for this particular contract.
Any other management that you've done in between, or this is your mid-contract management?
Management practices that we had to do was the first year after seeding, we'd mow it 3 times. The second year after seeding, mow it twice. Third year, just let it go. Fourth year, burn it. Years 5 through 8 or 9, let it go. The only other management that we have to take care of is thistles, either spot spray or go out and mow. But otherwise, it takes care of itself, and it's, you know, it's the plants that were here thousands and thousands of years, so they've learned to adapt. If it's dry, they're fine. If it's wet, they're fine. You know, you don't have to fertilize, you don't have to spray them, other than, like I say, the thistles. It pretty much takes care of itself. It knows how to do it.
Yeah, just speaking to the timing of the burn, generally with the mowing that you do in the first couple of years, these deep-rooted prairie species are going to be putting a lot of their energy into growing these deep below-ground roots, and they're not going to put a ton of growth above ground. And if you're coming off and knocking them over with the mower, you're really helping to give them the competitive advantage they need over some of the annual weeds and some of the other things that are going to be in there. But then what also happens is, like, you just don't have that much above ground material to carry a fire. So generally it's by about the spring of the 3rd year is the first time that you're going to have enough dried stalks and thatch to carry a fire. Before that, it can be a little bit patchy. So that's generally why, you know, it's about year 3 to 5 for the mid-contract maintenance for CRP. And that's kind of a general rule with most prairies. You really want to try to burn them as soon as you can, but by about the spring of the 3rd year is going to be about the best time that you can really get a good effective burn through a prairie.
Great. Any other questions before we log off here? And let me go here to the contact information slide. We'll sit here for just a minute or so, and you can see Tim's contact information there. I'm sure he's happy to take any other questions about prairie strips or prescribed fire, or put you in touch with someone in your area who can maybe help you a little bit more.
Yeah, and I guess if nobody really has any other questions, I would just, encourage, if you have other questions about prairie strips or just prairie in general, you can wander over to our website at prairiestrips.org. There's a lot of resources from ourselves and then from the University of Northern Iowa's Tallgrass Prairie Center with some of the basics if you want to get some prairie started on your land. It's really exciting. I mean, it is really our Iowa heritage. It's what was here for a long, long time. There's a lot of really neat things that are out there blooming right now in central Iowa. You can see I've got really nice bouquet here of just like a random array of nice forbs and a few different grasses. And these things are just critically valuable for a lot of the pollinators and the insects and the bird life that we share our lives here within Iowa. So by just putting a small amount of prairie either in your backyard or somewhere on your farm, you can really truly make a big difference. And I think you can enrich your life in the same while just planting some prairie. I would highly recommend it.
Great. Yeah, and you will definitely want to tune in on July 31st at 3 o'clock for that second webinar. We can see the prairie strips in late July and in their full glory and post burn. And we're going to talk a lot more about prairie strips generally and kind of establishment and management and working with tenants. So we're going to cover some of that other information there. But I just want to say thanks, Tim, and thanks, Eric. And if anyone has any questions that we didn't get to, feel free to reach out. And please remember when you log off to complete the evaluation, and you can be entered to win a PFI branded water bottle. So you don't want to miss out on your merchandise. Thanks.
Nice. Thanks a lot, everybody.